Thank you so much, Mary. I love being a Paige C student with you. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And thank you to all who are watching online now or later, and for those of you here. I am delighted to share my story of Pumpkin and the Dough with you, a story of synchronicity, embodiment, and eminence. This talk will address Carl Jung's theory of synchronicity as a lens through which to view the interconnection of animal-human encounters. It will explore how sensory engagement with natural and synchronistic experiences with animals can deepen human connections to both. Illuminating these concepts, the story of Pumpkin and the Dough, a case study based on scholarly personal narrative, exemplifies the potential for expanding our view of what it means to share the world with other ensouled beings, our animal friends. Jung's theory of synchronicity. Carl Jung lived at a remarkable time when new breakthroughs in quantum physics were emerging. These offered alternate models that suggested an interconnected reality in a Western world previously grounded in linear causality and Newtonian physics. Jung added immeasurably to the fields arising around him as he sought to include the psychological in these new theoretical frameworks. Jung's greatest contribution to this convergence is his theory of synchronicity. Informed by his life at the lake at Bollingen, surrounded by nature, but inspired by breakthroughs in the new field of quantum physics, Jung famously argued that psyche and matter interpenetrate each other. Jung defined synchronicity as taking the coincidence of events in space and time as meaning something more than mere chance, namely a peculiar interdependence of objective events among themselves, as well as within the subjective psychic states of the observer or observers. In doing so, he attempted to bridge the natural world of manifest reality with the psychological realm of the mind. Rupert Sheldrake has further evolved our understanding of the scientific underpinnings of Jung's synchronicity through his expansive research and conclusions about morphic fields. Sheldrake's hypothesis of formative causation suggests that self-organizing systems at all levels of complexity, including molecules, crystals, cells, tissues, organisms, and societies of organisms, are organized by morphic fields. These fields include the individuals within them, embracing them, as magnetic fields embrace and include the particles of iron that they characterize into recognizable patterns. As a biologist, Sheldrake's remarkable studies and arguments lead to a conclusion of interconnectedness and wholeness. This interconnection is further explained by recent developments in quantum physics, suggesting entanglement theory may underlie the structure of the known universe. Sheldrake quotes Paul Davies and John Gribben in this explanation. Once particles have interacted with one another, they remain linked in some way, effectively parts of the same indivisible system. This property of non-locality has sweeping implications. We can think of the universe as a vast network of interacting particles, and each linkage binds the participating particles into a single quantum system. Indigenous viewpoints create an inclusive framework for these experiences. Professor Jean Lacourt posits that most Indigenous peoples hold vastly different perceptions of animals than those who hold exclusively Western mechanistic and rational worldviews. This Indigenous viewpoint, according to Lacourt, does not contain the dualistic human versus non-human animal mindset which dominates the West, nor does it define and separate the embodied material plane from the spiritual dimensions. Lacourt explains Native people make less of a distinction between human, animal, and spiritual realities. These realities interpenetrate one another and share a common heritage. The story of Pumpkin and the Dough, which follows, fits within this Indigenous framework. My beautiful encounters with wildlife, clairvoyant visions, in moments attuned to the animals in and around my home, have blended the embodied, imaginal, and spiritual worlds. Though Lecourt's description of the Indigenous perspective feels quite accurate to me, this talk endeavors to explain these events through the lens of a Western philosophical system, in the hope that we continue to evolve our Western rational mindsets towards more expansive models of consciousness and post-humanism. So accessing the spiritual dimensions, since childhood, I've sought out the imaginal realms and their access points in pursuit of meaning, healing, the greater mysteries. I've taken weight and meaning to dream imagery, visions, insights from meditation. As a clairvoyant, I often see and perceive energy in vivid visual detail that isn't physically manifest in the world. And other modalities I've developed to access the subtle realms include training to access the Akashic field and give Akashic readings, and meditation, also divination systems such as I Ching and Tarot. When engaging in these practices, I trust that the wisdom, images, and symbols reflect the underlying themes and patterns in my life and psyche via synchronicity. Case study, Pumpkin in the Dough. Pumpkin was our beloved Maine Coon breed therapy cat and my partner, Mark's closest companion. Barbara Smuts writes about extraordinary animals and the kinds of relational encounters that are possible in trans-species relationships. Such was our experience with Pumpkin. We marveled that Pumpkin was a cat. He seemed like such a vivid being with such an expansive personality. He would greet everyone who came to our Oakland home, sit on sofas in the living room at peer level, and even sat in my partner's therapy chair when Mark had clients come to the house for therapy. Mark was forced to either give up the therapy chair to Pumpkin and pull another chair in from the kitchen, which is usually what happened, or unseat Pumpkin from his throne. To our dismay, we lost Pumpkin rather suddenly after moving up to Sonoma County. Turned out he'd had a very aggressive cancer that wasn't discoverable, even though we took him to the vet 5 times before he died. We were devastated. He died December 11th, 2023, so just about a year and a half ago. And his death was a harsh reminder that my anthropocentric desires and intentions were up against much larger forces at work. I wanted him to just be happy in the new home and, enjoy life in Sonoma County with us. But Pumpkin had his own agency and sovereignty and need to die. During that time, a beautiful doe who favored our hillside yard started to sleep right outside our bedroom window, kind of nestled on an embankment there. I actually took a picture in October of 2023 that captured both Pumpkin and the doe in the same frame. But one morning in January, about a month after Pumpkin had died, I woke up to see the doe outside our window unnaturally still, eyes open. She had died in the night. It had been very cold, and the man who removed her remains said that she'd likely had pneumonia. So it really broke my heart, and I wished that I could have done more for her, maybe offered her warmth, antibiotics. I cried all day. Her death echoed the loss of Pumpkin just a month before and triggered a depth of grief as well as powerlessness and sadness. I identified with the sentiment expressed by wildlife biologist Barbara Smuts. Caring deeply entails vulnerability because what we hold sacred may disappear or be harmed or defiled. I honored her life and death that day by placing flowers where she had died and burning incense and offering prayers for her in the world. Ruth Williams describes the comfort that quantum entanglement theory offers us when we experience the grief that comes with endings. She writes, this helps us recognize our interdependency as a human species and encourages us to respect our links with animals and nature. It also makes us think about the struggles people experience in letting go after relationship breakups or death. Does the link ever come to an end? She asks. The grieving process entails cutting the binds metaphorically, but perhaps the link is deeper than we know. when souls connect, there's a feeling that they remain connected throughout time. I felt this way after our therapy kitty Pumpkin died. Rebirth, enter the kittens. In this story, the happiest outcome about observing and intending resulted from a vision I received a couple of weeks after the death of Pumpkin. I was tapping into his essence in my own way, in a different dimension, and clairvoyantly received a vivid picture of two kittens in his likeness, two fluffy orange and white Maine Coon kittens, and they seemed to be in sort of a yin-yang symbol, head to tail. It was absolutely adorable, and I got this sense of siblings, possibly a male and female kitten from the same litter. So it was such a compelling and adorable picture that I actually laughed out loud when I received it, because Pumpkin has such a big sort of diva personality. It made sense that it would take two kittens to fill the space he'd held. This potent vision led me to reach out to a friend who'd volunteered for and fostered kittens at Hopalong, an animal rescue shelter in Oakland. I shared about the loss of our beloved kitty and asked her to keep an eye out. Sure enough, the very first batch of kittens arrived at the shelter in April. She said, Paige, they match your description exactly. They look like Maine Coon mixed kittens, orange and white, but there are 3, not 2. So our first chance to meet the kittens was on April 18th, exactly 1 year ago, which is also my birthday. So the synchronicity of that was just amazing, just delighted me. So we went to meet them 1 year ago. The male kitten tucked under my partner's arm the moment they met, reminding us of Pumpkin's sleeping arrangements, and the rest was choiceless. We were besotted and took all 3 home. We named them, like good depth psychologists, Pluto, Persephone, and Plumeria. I could not have imagined we would have ended up adopting 3 kittens, nor how much they would invite me to connect more deeply and intimately with the natural world. The kittens inspire me to spend much more time outside in natural settings, engaging with them or following them around the neighborhood as they play and climb and chase the falling leaves and baby lizards. They also bring...
2-minute warning.
Thank you. They bring more aliveness into the house with their intermittently playful, sweet, sleepy, hungry, pouncing indoor behaviors. So if you're looking for additional ways to bring the aliveness in, strongly recommend adopting a pet or 2, if possible. It's been so comforting to focus on the sensory awareness of sharing space with these animals, protecting, tending to, and witnessing them as they come of age in our neighborhood. I found it especially soothing given the geopolitical drama and climate crises in the collective. Plumeria, Persephone, and Pluto show no interest in the news other than chasing the lights across the TV screen at times. Instead, they seem to exist within Rilke's description of the open, playing, eating, sleeping, and communing with their neighborhood friends, unfazed by the headlines. In a remarkable continuation of synchronicity and the theme of rebirth, the kittens befriended 2 young deer families who frequent our side and front yards. I watched with deep concern and skepticism the first time I witnessed Plumeria walk right up to a young buck nibbling grass in our side yard. Instead of trampling Plumeria, the buck nose-kissed her after a brief assessment. As scared as I was that Plumeria would be killed, it simultaneously felt like I was in an animated Disney movie. Just unreal, adorable, unbelievable in its sweetness and innocence. Several days later, I watched Plumeria and a young fawn dash side to side under the olive trees in a playful game of trans-species tag. It was more heartwarming than even the sweetest nature-based scenes from Disney's Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. Smuts captures this feeling state well. Sometimes encounters like these with other than human animals seem magical, as in a storybook, where someone appears unexpectedly and extraordinary events unfold. Our neighbors have commented on how cute they find it to watch the kittens play with the deer in our front yard. Their developing friendship seems to have a fairy tale quality for all who observe them. In conclusion, witnessing this cycle of death and rebirth and the interplay of intention and attunement have instilled feelings of transcendence, wonder, and a deep sense of mystery. To quote Smuts again, I'm grateful for the opportunity this talk provided to delve into these beautiful concepts and lived mysteries. Preparing this talk allowed me to deeply reflect on and integrate these remarkable experiences of synchronicity. Moreover, I've discovered that Persephone, Pluto, and Plumeria, and the deer have transmuted my grief into joy. Their embodied aliveness, playfulness, and affection have expanded my heart exponentially, from a state contracted in grief to one overflowing with love, hope, and mostly hope, some hope, and resilience. In this way, the effects of unconditional love, the regenerative power of nature, and the morphic field of our hillside home have fulfilled their alchemical potentials to purify, transmute, and transform. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Let's just take a deep breath. Exhale with a sigh. Time stops. Under the burning sun, like a thread of smoke that's lowering, you leave forever on the mossy balcony. The light fades, wild grass along the river. That was a poem from my grandmaster, in other words, my root teacher's teacher. My name is Suchandra, and we're going to dive into a new kind of world that perhaps one day we can co-create together. In order to see the unseen and know the unknown, we must be daring enough to see what is truly there, the reality. Today, we will go through 3 key elements: awareness, insight, and action. But before we do that, let's wake up our minds a little bit more. So, pop quiz. You can shout out loud or you can silently just answer. Complete the sentence. What flows through your attention? A, B, or C? The answer is C. What flows through your attention sculpts your brain. Next question. What are the general ways to improve attention? Intention, setting, quieting the mind, staying awake and alert, and abiding in awareness. The message here is simple. So we notice the gap between our thoughts. This is a palpable way to discern the field of awareness from its contents. This way, perhaps, we no longer get caught up or stuck in the nets of delusion. So we see immediately that mindfulness, it changes the structure of the brain, because amongst countless benefits, those who are mindful are not servants of their emotions. What about the connection with mindfulness and learning new things? So in science, we see neural pathways, brain plasticity. So besides Eurocentric data, which all of us can easily access, we have Google Scholar amongst other sources or library. We have an ancient text, the textual records originating back to 20 BCE. So this presentation is very focused on that, the Satipatthana Sutta. So it means the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We're going to dive into it, and we're going to bridge it with science. So prior to that, to the writing of the Satipatthana Sutta, it was orally transmitted. We'll find how our attention, it's like a spotlight. The spotlight illuminates the mind stream, and it's going to shape our brains. We see that in every moment of our life. So we have virtue, mindfulness, and wisdom, or easily said, well-being, personal growth, contemplative practice. These are the pillars of everyday wellness, right? So they also draw upon 3 fundamental neural functions. So we can connect well-being to regulation, personal growth to learning, and contemplative practice to selection. So the path of awakening, many people are like, I want to be enlightened, I want to be awakened. But what does it involve? It involves both transforming the mind, the brain, and uncovering the true nature that was there the whole time. This is science. So to understand, we need to go to the beginning and ask, what does the word mindful really mean? Sati is the Sanskrit word for mindfulness. So sati is related to the verb satati, which means to remember. This is the ability to recall to mind what has been done or said long ago. The standard definition here. So although this definition, it establishes a relationship we see clearly between mindfulness and memory, let's make a note immediately that it doesn't equate the two. So when we look closer at the traditional text, when we dissect the Sanskrit more, we see that sati is actually defined as that which facilitates memory. So if sati, mindfulness, is present, memory will be able to function well. To understand being mindful in a direct way beyond theory, we traditionally begin with number one, contemplation of body, right? These are the 4 foundations of mindfulness broken down. We see it's not just a very one-way practice. There are many ways to practice. So within contemplation of body, we have the first one, breath, foundation of contemplative practice. This breath, it's both gross and subtle, so it's always there. The most reliable thing we have. So if you want to dive deeper, since we don't have time to really go into the practice, if you're here, you're at CIS, I recommend you attend some of the mindfulness sessions through the Wellness Center. Then you can experience for yourself directly. In the meantime, we don't have time again to go through each piece, but let's look for a moment at number 4, contemplation of phenomena. Here, the very first one, we have written the 5 hindrances. So this is that which weakens wisdom, right? So just like we breathe in and out mindfully, fully aware, what if we relinquish, let go of 5 types of mental hindrances? What's going to happen? We let go of sense desire, ill will and anger, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse and doubt. And just like we breathe in and out, when we sit on the formal meditation, on the cushion, the training ground, we also have these phenomena every day rising and falling. So the query here is, can we notice it before it arises and transform it into something useful? So for example, here, we have a thought of ill will and anger arise. If we maintain our mindfulness, then we can transform that. When mindfulness is developed through morality, wisdom, patience, right, or wise effort, then perhaps this anger and ill will can transform into loving kindness and compassion toward others, and we behave differently. And when we behave differently, the other behaves differently. But remember, to enable mental concentration, to enable us to not just react, but to respond, we need to have insight, which arises through the contemplation of breath. This is what will calm the mind. When the mind is calm, the body is calm, and vice versa. So what if our solution is not necessarily what we do out there, but it starts with what we're doing in here? So take another deep breath in. Let it go with a sigh. We transform our life from the inside out. Then our planet has no choice but to transform, right? So rather than only considering life when it's happening to us, we can use these tools, such as mindfulness, to evoke a reconceptualization of connection to ourselves, to others, and to the planet. So is this the invisible thread? Remember this just a few moments ago? Everything requires a technique. So our psychoecology It's at stake, okay? We're in a psycho-ecological crisis. Let's briefly zoom in. Zoom in the Four Noble Truths. So we see here, number 4, at the very bottom, Four Noble Truths. Now, if you've heard about the Four Noble Truths before, keep an open mind. Okay? Within the Four Noble Truths, we have the truth of suffering. This is the first truth. So we all know it, we all experience it, right? Every time you're dissatisfied about something, you're upset about something, suffering. So if we don't save ourselves from our own suffering, how can we help those we love? Moreover, our numinous earth. Step 1, develop concentration. Concentration will lead you to insight. It happens also through reflection, these 3 points. So, what's step 2? Action. Mindfulness can be classified as wholesome and right action in a way, right? So action itself can be wholesome and unwholesome. So when we operate from a mode of behavior or a form of practice that leads to the diminishing of the causes of suffering for not only oneself, but for others as well, this is wholesome action. So if what I'm doing is actually causing you to perhaps not suffer so much, and at the same time, I'm not suffering so much, and the actions you're doing is causing the people around you to not suffer so much, and likewise yourself, then we have wholesome action. So I'd advise anyone to reflect actually on this very carefully later. In contrast, when mindfulness comes in conjunction with unwholesome actions and intentions, right, it will be qualified as going in the wrong direction. For lack of better words, I use right and wrong here, okay? So why? It lacks the fundamental insight that each of us, we build our own afflictions. Everything happens through the mind, right? We cause ourselves harm and the world around us harm, but if we can heal these aspects by being aware of them, can you imagine what world would it be? From the inside out. Very important. So this is not a practice that in retrospect, we're like, oh yeah, I made a mistake. No. How do we, prior to the action, through body, speech, and mind, actually create that which will lessen suffering for the world at large? The funny thing is that every time we think we're being mindful, we think we're being aware, we're going to realize every time we're not. It's really lovely. And that is the development of awareness. That's how transformation happens. So this is actually where transpersonal psychology comes into play. Transcending the ego structures takes time. Transcending our beloved planet, Earth, takes patience. If we wait until tomorrow, we never have a chance to transform today. So perhaps now is the time to say yes to humanity and resolve to be, as Mahatma Gandhi once said, be the change you wish to see in the world. And just maybe, just like Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey can unfold, maybe now you are being called. This is how our inner work leads to outer results. I know what you're thinking. But Suchandra, this is going to take forever. No, it won't take forever. Mindfulness is both a process and an outcome. So here we are in academia. What do we need? First of all, we need future research in contemplative pedagogy. Eco and transpersonal psychology must be more rigorous in design and execution. Besides contemplative practices, I would posit these first steps. First, how can we arrive at definitions that are both conceptually and operationally useful to our work at large? In order to do this, we need to have a consensus on defining components or processes. Another aspect of the field that needs work. So this is a really precious opportunity. And those of you working with youth, embodied education is essential. People learn more from your actions than your words. So don't give empty words. What are you prepared to do about it? How can we have a deeper ecology of the mind? What if we're the river flowing into the vast great seas? The ocean. So I'm going to call you forth for us to all weave together a mindful world and eco-psychology. Now, for the sake of final validity, we have some references. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't be there. I've been dealing with some health issues, which means I've missed most of the conference as well. So I apologize to those whose presentations I've missed. It's been an interesting process for me because it was only last night that I really got an into this topic. So I'd like to rephrase my title a little bit to give you a sense of where I'm going. The numinous in the particular in the person, personhood in all things, personhood is all things. So in this talk, I want to suggest that the numinous, which is a quality or feeling of spirit or the divine, which can be terrifying and or awe-inspiring, can be found in the particular and unique manifestations of beings and forms and places with which or with whom we engage. To welcome us into this territory, I would like to read a poem by Mary Oliver called The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What I love about that poem is many things, but she's talking about and she's sharing with us her encounter with a particular grasshopper, not grasshoppers in general, but this particular grasshopper and the encounter she had with it. And she experienced, from what I understand of the poem, that was a numinous moment for her. I've been exploring the relationship between the particular and the numinous since probably around 2000 or 2001, when I had a powerful embodied encounter with a mountain, where I felt like the mountain had reached out to me and connected with me in an embodied way. It was that particular mountain connecting with specifically me in that moment. This encounter really called into question a lot of what I've been taught about what this world is. The sense that the world is inanimate and has no sentience. I definitely experienced sentience and relationality in that moment with the mountain. And it was initiated by the mountain. I have had similar experiences with a river, a tree, and with other beings. And for my dissertation, I'm continuing to explore human-tree communications with this understanding of trees as persons. So what is a definition of a person? According to anthropologist Laura Rival, qualities of personhood include some form of sentience, intelligence, sensitivity to one's environment, awareness, and volition, having a sense of will and a capacity to interact with one's environment. While it may be harder to sense these qualities in more than human beings, for instance, do rocks possess will and the ability to exercise this will in their environment? It may be that the modern Western anthropocentric interpretation with which we understand these capacities may limit our ability to experience the ways that these qualities show up in the more than human world. One essential quality that I want to highlight is the relational nature of the world. This understanding is described throughout the writings of who we call Indigenous or First Nation scholars and writers, such as Robin Wall Kimmerer, Wahinkpe Topa and Darcia Narvaez, and Tyson Yunkaporta, among others, who refer to the environments with which they live and the beings with whom they share space as kin. This idea is also held by neo-animism and panpsychism. For example, marine biologist and philosopher Andreas Weber writes, animistic thinking perceives subjectivity in matter not as exclusive and contradictory, but as co-present. Therefore, indigenous thought takes the world, humans, plants, animals, rivers, rocks, rain, and spirits, as a society of persons, which are in a constant becoming together. You are kin to all beings, and all beings, organisms, rivers, mountains, are persons. End quote. The understanding that we are relationally interconnected is also explored in psychiatrist and neuroscientist Daniel J. Siegel's book called Intra-Connected. In this book, he cites Albert Einstein, who was quoted in the New York Times in 1950 as saying, quote, "A human being experiences himself as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and for affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." So how might we begin to engage in this and begin to explore an engagement with the more than human world that is relational and that holds these beings as persons? I want to suggest some what I feel are key ingredients of this, and but this is by no means exhaustive. So first is attitude. How are we approaching a more than human being, form, or place? Two key attitudes that I have come across repeatedly in my readings is that we approach the world with attitudes of respect and reciprocity. We respect the personhood of the being, form, or place with whom we are interacting, meaning we treat them as we would treat another person that we offer respect to. One way we can do this is to introduce ourselves and then ask permission to engage with this being, form, or place, and wait for a response, which is usually felt in the body or in some kind of intuitive sense. Reciprocity is a way of acknowledging what has been received from and giving back to the more than human self with whom you have engaged. For instance, when you leave the engagement, make an offering of some kind, one that is mindful of the well-being of this more than human self, or simply say thank you. Those are just examples. Another quality is intention, which is closely related to attitude. As you're approaching engagement with another more than human being, you may want to ask yourself, for what reason am I engaging with this more than human self? Am I seeking to get something from this encounter? If so, what am I willing to give back? If you have no intention of giving something back, or if you have an extractive mentality, I'm going to get what I can from this, the response you receive from this more than human self may be very different than if you have an intention of authentic and respectful, what Freya Matthews calls subject to subject relating, as opposed to subject to object relating. Curiosity is another important ingredient for these encounters, especially for those of us who have grown up in a paradigm that has objectified the more than human world, teaching us that this world is not intelligent or sentient and is here only for our human benefit and consumption. Be curious about this being with whom you are engaging. Be open to whatever you might experience with this being, and approach with an attitude of curiosity about the ways with which this more than human self may engage with you. Embodiment is key. Connecting with the more than human world and being available to receive what this more than human self may want to share with you happens most directly through our bodies. According to Abigail Rose Clark, the author of Returning Home to Our Bodies, quote, somatic observation is an engaged practice of active inquiry into the relationships within the body and between the body and the world, unquote. She claims that the capitalist system as it is operated today, as well as colonialism, neo-fascism, racism, and other forms of oppression and social control, want to keep us isolated from ourselves and from each other and from the world. The act of embodiment or somatic awareness is an act of connection and relationality which counteracts these systems of oppression. Imagination is also key and is closely related to the others. If you are new to this, enter into an encounter with a more than human self, imagining that it is possible to have a meaningful relational encounter with this being, form, or place. Then, with an attitude of open receptivity, see what unfolds, or really feel what unfolds. When I was exploring a relationship with a Monterey cypress tree for my master's thesis, I had a number of embodied experiences of being energetically penetrated by the tree. During one particular instance, I felt as if the quality of woodness were penetrating me through my back, which was resting against the tree. I allowed myself to be present with these sensations as they moved through my body, and I felt in my body what it might feel like to be wood. As I was sensing this energetic exchange, I allowed myself to imagine that tree was enfolding me in her embodied experience, and I was energetically becoming a part of tree's body through this experience of woodness. Since the more than human beings will not be communicating with us through spoken words, they will use other ways to communicate with us, such as through our bodies and imaginations. They may communicate through an intuitive felt sense knowing, through imagery, or through synchronicities which unfold as part of the encounter, to name just a few examples. Present, receptive, and attentive awareness is also important. In order to engage with a more than human other, it is important that we slow down and bring our full-bodied self into the engagement. More than human selves operate at different frequencies and speeds as they engage with the world. We have a better chance of sensing an encounter with a more than human self if we come with an attitude of open and receptive attention and slow down enough to receive the sometimes subtle communications that a more than human self is offering. Silence is also a quality that can help when seeking communion with a more than human being. In order to be available to receive the sometimes subtle communications that a more than human self is offering. The combination of present receptive awareness, silence, and embodied imagination is what I call deep listening, which is listening to one's environment with one's whole being. I use the analogy of becoming an antenna, using one whole being to tune in and be ready to receive the signals that a more than human self may be sending. Wonder is a powerful ally to this process and is closely related to curiosity. When your attention is being grabbed, go with it. See if what you are being drawn to is calling for you in some way. Like a child, allow yourself to be captured by what is drawing your attention and take the time to experience the wonder that can come from engaging in an encounter with a more than human self, no matter how small or large. And finally, being mindful of language. How are we speaking with or about the world and the beings with whom we are engaging? Using words like it or other objectifying words helps to form our understanding and our experience of the world around us. Speak of the world around us and the beings with whom you are engaging as persons, not as objects. This is not an exhaustive list. I'm sure more could be added to this list, and I'd love to know what others may want to add. For now, I'll leave you with a rule of life from Mary Oliver. She offers the following in her poem, Sometimes. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it. Thank you.
So, can unmute me? Yep. It's done, okay. All right, now we have maybe 8 to 10 minutes of question and answer. And is there anyone in the room first that would like to ask a question of any of the panelists?
Thanks so much. I feel like I'm hogging the mic today. I just want to ask everybody everything. I'm curious for all the panelists, but especially maybe for Kevin. I think perhaps it's easy for traditional psychologies and the public to think or to say that when we are imagining ourselves in relation to beings of the natural world, that we're projecting, that it's nothing more than our imagination, that sort of thing. And I know for myself, I think many of us have had experiences that tell us otherwise, but I'm curious what you would say to that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great question. One of the ways that I would respond is, first of all, the imagination is not a bad thing, and it's not a lesser thing than other ways of using the mind. Imagination is not making something up. It's using our mind in a particular way of engagement with the world around us and with the world within us. Having said that, that's why I think embodiment is so important. I spent 6 months, I'd spend an hour a week for 6 months with this particular tree, this Monterey cypress tree in the Panhandle. And the way that I dealt with my own questions about projection is I would return to the felt sense experience. So it's returning to the body, it's returning to what is emerging in our bodies as we're engaging with this more than human self. And the body becomes an awareness of our own bodies and what's happening inside of us. And then what's happening as we engage with this other being or a place is one way that I address that question of projection. If I'm feeling it in my body and I'm really attuning to what's happening in my body and in relationship with this other being, how that changes my body or my experience in my body, that for me becomes an anchor into that connection and helps me to answer that question of projection. There's also one of my committee members said that we talk about projection as a problem, and he said it's really not. But I need to delve into that a little bit more. But those are the embodiment piece, anchoring in our bodies in our felt sense is one way that I address that.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you have a question?
Just one short comment. Ria said imagination is a portal to receive. So kind of riffing off of what you're saying.
Okay. Paige, would you respond to the question?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you. It's a compelling question, and I would second Kevin's response about sort of somatically experience. Personally, I tend to look for kind of a resonance within the body, like a somatically felt yes, versus just what I might characterize as sort of a mental, moment of fancy or fantasy, something sort of flitting through, versus something that really reverberates or resonates, especially, deepening into these more than the self, more than human encounters. And Kevin, I'm so struck by your devotion, an hour a day for 6 months. That's so beautiful. And I'm curious if your sense of becoming wood, becoming sort of penetrated by the cypress tree deepened over that time. But perhaps this is really for others to ask questions. So.
Just hold the mic. Sikandra, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you so much, Paige and Kevin. I really also enjoyed both your presentations, and I think my response is very simple: mindfulness. But let's go deeper. What's the methodology there? The methodology would be asking oneself, is this true? And what's truer than that? Is this real? What's realer than that? What's true and what's real? Kind of this reflective contemplation.
Jonathan, is there someone online in the chat that would like to speak?
No, not at this point.
A question or comment? So in the room, Sarah?
Thanks to all three of you for those wonderful presentations. And I think I just want to add on, I was actually, Helen asked the question that I was kind of going to ask around how do you tell the difference between synchronicity and projection and sort of wishful projection of our own intention into the field. And I think what struck me from Paige's presentation was your experience of laughter, almost in surprise, when you saw the image of the two kittens. Like to me, that that experience, both of recognition, I think at least this is what I'm projecting onto your presentation, that there was both recognition, like, oh, of course, but also an experience of surprise, like that there's something other coming here through that, through that experience of surprise. So, yeah, I don't know if it's a question so much as a comment.
Okay, I'd like to just have one more round of each of the speakers responding to that comment or giving your final remarks. Go ahead, we'll start with you, Paige.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I harbor some of those, I do have my own doubts and my own rational mindset, and often wonder, where is that barrier between wishful thinking or my own mental projection, and versus receiving something sort of tangible. And so definitely being surprised, being surprised and delighted, receiving sort of messages or images that I really feel like I couldn't have come up with or wouldn't have, that weren't constellated in my daily life in any way, is definitely, one of those moments. And then of course, when both Pumpkin and the doe died, that was definitely the end of any kind of, imaginal, the limitation of my own intention, right? That sort of power of the intention and the observer, and what are the limits of that, where I can sort of project my own desires that Pumpkin live versus his exit. But yeah, it's very fun to be so surprised. And then we were surprised yet again when there were actually 3 kittens that were siblings. And the 2 who fit the visual were both girls, but I sort of saw a boy and a girl. So we wound up with all 3. That was also a surprise and delight of sort of following that intuition in the world, taking action.
Thank you. Sikandra, would you like to give some final remarks?
Yeah, thank you. I feel like that was a really profound reflection. And I don't know who you are because it's so small on my screen. So thank you for what you said there. I think, what if the world is just our projection? And what are we going to do about our minds? I don't think we need to distinguish that. I think that for me, it's inspiration to cultivate my mind more and more. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and Kevin, your final thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, I love that surprise was brought into the room, and it makes me think of, again, wandering in the environments that you're in, and just having your senses attuned to what's around you. You will be surprised by what may show up or who may show up. I had an experience. I was walking down a sidewalk going to an appointment, and I heard this bird song. For some reason, it captured my attention. And I looked around, and there's a little bird sitting on the sidewalk near a bush, but on the sidewalk, and was a very small bird filling up its body with air and then singing, and his whole body would shake as they sang. And I just stood there for, I don't know, a couple of minutes, just offering my gratitude and admiration for this full-bodied experience that this bird was having. And at one point, this is where imagination comes in. The bird which was facing away from me, hopped around and started face my direction and sang like 4 notes, and then hopped back around to its original spot to continue singing. And in my imagination, I'm just holding that as that bird was acknowledging my appreciation. And I don't care if it's can be proved scientifically. That moment to me has opened up a way of belonging with this world that I didn't have before, which was to be especially attuned to birdsong and to who is singing in the environment. So yeah, be open to surprise and allow yourself to be drawn in.
That was beautiful, and the whole panel was terrific. I want to thank them by applause.